So I've been in the market for a gimbal for quite a while now. I've looked at a bunch online, I've played with some in person, and I've read more reviews than I'd care to remember. But the S1 by Removu is the first model that I've actually been very interested in, so much so that I bought it. Let's take a look and see if I'm keeping it or if I'm making a return. Let's start first with a quick unboxing. My prop out of the way. One thing I do want to mention that they sent in the box was a mount for the GoPro Hero 5. I'm still using the 3 Plus. I'm kind of holding out for the 6 to come along, so I haven't used that yet. You get a kind of a soft, rubbery case with it. It's got hard points in the corners, a little bit of rubber kind of going over the zipper, so it's not waterproof, but it is water or weather resistant. But it is a nice textured case. Your hands don't slip and it doesn't move on a table. All right, once opened up, you have a mesh compartment on the top, inside of which you have your open mount for the GoPro Hero 3, 3 Plus, 4. You have a lanyard for your wrist, USB charging cable, as well as the actual charger for itself. What's nice here is you can charge 2 batteries at once and the remote. I like that. Switching compartments. You've got a nice padded interior foam lid, which separates the internal parts from the rest of the case. You've got a mount for the GoPro Session. You have the weather resistant case for the 3, the 3 Plus, and the 4. You have a cap for the bottom of the gimbal itself if you're not using the handle. You have a counterweight to offset the weight of the heavier cameras. If you're using the 4 with the screen or the 5, they recommend you use this weight to keep from wearing the motors out. And then you have the battery itself. Next, we have the remote, or the handle, and the remote. It's kind of a combination. If you simply push down here, the remote slides up and out of the handle. Made this recessed area here so you can kind of create a fulcrum by just pushing in slightly and it pops out. It's held in place with magnets up here near the top. They are strong magnets. It's not going to go anywhere. It is held in place very firmly, but it comes out very smoothly and it's a very nice little portable remote. And then we have the gimbal itself. Now the gimbal has the main motor and then the 2 side motors that will also handle supporting the unit. So it's a 3-axis gimbal. Will support any type of motion in those areas. You can see this is one end of the motor. It won't extend any farther, and then same on the other side. So it's not quite a 360-degree motion, but it's probably about 340 degrees, somewhere in that range. All the motors have similar range. You can see this upper motor here will rotate to the point where it's hitting the motor behind, or the housing, so it won't actually rotate the whole direction. So the motors themselves are all brushless. They are weather resistant, so while they are not exactly waterproof, they can handle being out in some rain, some snow, so you're not going to impact or damage the gimbal in any way with a little bit of water. And even in cleaning it, they recommend just showering it slightly with some water to clean off any dirt or anything that might be on the gimbal itself. So that's what you get in the box. Let's take a deeper dive into the entire setup. The first thing I wanted to take a quick look at were the cases themselves. Again, I am using the GoPro Hero 3 Plus. So the first case to look at is the external housing. It has a little cantilever here that kind of pops open and loosens the tension on the side of the case. And inside it's kind of hard to see on camera, but there's a little lip that you put your camera in and it rests against. It won't go in any farther. Then you close the latch and it locks the camera in place. Now it is held in there pretty good, but with a little bit of effort and a little bit of shaking, the camera can start to pop out where it's not fully gripped by the case. I really don't believe that it would fall out, but if you're doing any serious mountain biking, going over any rocks or anything like that, the audio quality will be better, but I am slightly concerned that it might fall out. I highly doubt it. There's some gripping sections in here. I really don't think it will fall out. It doesn't instill a lot of confidence with my finger. I can start to push it out without applying too much force, but then at about that part, it really starts. I have to push pretty hard to get it out, but I'm afraid that offsetting the weight might impact the way it stabilizes or anything like that. For this type of a design, I would like to see something more along the lines of the default case that came with the Hero 3, where you have this latching mechanism that would actually come down and grab it. Replace this with a similar idea where it would come down and actually grab it and pull it shut. I think you'd end up with a much better setup in a more secure case. And then they could even put an edge on the back of the case here to keep the camera from ever coming out in either direction. And it wouldn't take up any more space, really. They do have an opening here so you can get to the side panel. It covers up the latch so you can't actually take the panel off, but you can have it open and get to your SD cards without having to take the whole thing off. But honestly, I would rather sacrifice access to that side panel and have a case that I have a bit more confidence in. Now again, it's not bad, it's not the best confidence inspiring device. The weather resistant case has a latch that's kind of mounted on the bottom, and then you open it up and you get to the inside and the camera just slots right in and it clicks right together. Opening on the top for the upper microphone. The side microphone is covered, but that's okay. You wouldn't put it in here if you want the best audio quality, but it does work and the sound is not too bad. I usually ride with this case or even my all waterproof case, just because if I'm riding, I usually ride through some mud puddles or things like that on my bike, or if I'm skiing, I'm going to be getting snow or powder on it. And I just feel more confident with it being in this type of a case that nothing's gonna get on the camera, nothing's gonna hurt it. Now with the Hero 5, being mostly waterproof down to a certain depth and things, I wouldn't be as concerned with that camera, but for the older generation, definitely, for me, I feel much more confident with it in the weather resistant housing just because I don't want any water getting on the camera itself. I did a 2-hour ride and I only used about a third of the entire battery life. I don't think I'd push a full 6 hours out of the battery of heavy usage. That was mountain biking, so the camera was bouncing around a lot and the gimbal had to do a lot of countering. But to still have that amount of battery life left was pretty impressive to me. It's 6.29 watt hours, and it was pretty impressive to finish a just over 2-hour ride of pretty decent rock gardens, bumps, smooth trails, which in mountain biking doesn't mean they're smooth, just smoother. But to still have that much battery life left, I think the battery could be a little smaller, and I'd be much happier to change out a couple batteries and have a smaller package, because the GoPro battery only lasts about 2.5 hours anyway. So I ended up having to change out the GoPro battery with 20 minutes left on my ride. So good battery. Now, the issue I have with the battery compartment here is there's a little latch that you have to push down, which unlocks the 2 little levers and opens the compartment. You can see it's water resistant in here as well. Very easy to install. It just slides right in and you close the latch. Now it's spring loaded, so it wants to pop open, which makes closing this a little difficult, because if you push too hard on one side, the other pops open. You have push in the middle, then you kind of block the door, making it somewhat difficult to latch closed. Not the end of the world, but it is a slight annoyance. So let's get the camera mounted up here. We'll put it in the external case. There's a white dot that corresponds to the mount. So match the white dots, rotate it, clicks into place. Very easy, very simple. And then there's only 3 buttons. You've got power, link, and mode. So just push and hold the power button for a second. You'll see the gimbal immediately snap to life. The screen here is OLED, so it's really bright, very easy to see. Even in direct sunlight, you have no problems reading the screen, which is fantastic, makes it very easy to see and use. And it defaults to pan mode. So if I set it on the table, the gimbal is stabilized. If I rotate it to the left, the camera will slowly drag after it as it's kind of slaved to the motion of the sensors. If I lean forward, which I'll do from this side here, so if I start moving the device around the camera, it's going to try to maintain stability, but it is going to rotate if I pan it. Now if I move it into this mode, it automatically switches the motors, so if I start to pan, you can see the gimbal adjusting to keep up. Now it does seem to run a little slower when it's in this position, but it does a pretty decent job of keeping up with whatever angle you're working with and whatever you're doing. Now, the other modes that are available, the next one is a follow mode, which if you look at the camera, as I look up, the camera will slowly pan up. As I look down, the camera will slowly pan down. And it will again rotate and pan alongside, but the difference being the motion of the camera as I lean up and down. Some bikers will use this mode. I would not recommend doing it because if you're riding and going down a hill and the camera tries to look down, by the time you hit the bottom, you're going to start aiming up. And depending on how it's mounted, you may end up bottoming out the camera and kind of freaking it out, and it may kind of shut down if it can't figure out what's going on fast enough, especially if the motor hits the end of its motion range, especially when you're riding and it's mounted like this because it's going to be mounted to your chest. You may bottom it out and then try to come up, and the gimbal may kind of freak out and shut down. So the best mode for riding would be pan. Now the next mode is lock mode, which I've put it in now, and what this does is it kind of locks the camera in one fixed position. And no matter how you move the gimbal, how you rotate it, it does its best to stay locked on one focused target. That is the best mode to use the remote with, so let me flip it back over here and we'll bring the remote into this. Now with the remote in, you simply push and hold the power button for a second. It will turn on. This battery lasts an incredibly long amount of time. It's even more lengthy than that, but again, it doesn't have much to do, and it'll shut itself off and go into a power saving mode. But it's a 4-way control module with a push button in the center, so 5 buttons. Push it in and it will change the mode. And depending on which mode you're in, it will restrict certain motion. So I'm in pan mode, meaning I cannot look left or right because the panning is handled by the motion of the gimbal's housing itself. But I can rotate the camera down or up as necessary. And if I switch it over to follow mode, same thing. I can set my default or my center on the camera itself. And if I switch into lock mode now, I have full left, right panning, as well as down and up tilting. And if you go diagonal, you can activate both motors at the same time to do a pan and a tilt. You have to push a little harder and sometimes it'll stop, but it can be done, which can create for some very interesting and unique shots, especially off of a gimbal. So that's lock mode. The remote is fantastic. I really like it. It works well even in the handle. So to mount the handle to the gimbal itself, I am going to come over here, and on the bottom you can see there's the white dot and there's the white dot on the handle itself. So you just match the two up in angle. Kind of have to wiggle it in. There's a little O-ring on top. Rotate it till it clicks, and now you have the handle that you can hold, rotate, and maneuver around. And I found when in this mode, if you're holding it, the best thing to do is to try and lead your shot a little bit by pre-rotating to get the gimbal moving. And that way you can keep your subject or your target framed up properly as best as you can. I mean, most of these are made for action movements or walking around. And so you kind of have to get a little used to kind of pre-moving where you want the gimbal to rotate. And you can see sometimes it'll struggle until you actually get it in the right mode, or the right motor is selected for how you have oriented the camera. So the handle's very convenient, very handy to have. It has a bit of weight to it. It weighs about a pound or some change. I think the official weight will be listed on the box or online, but it's not cumbersome to hold. It's not unpleasant. Your arm will of course get tired, but it does work really well. And it's pretty simple to flip it between the different modes. So I'm in pan mode right now. I would walk around like this. If I want to flip it into low mode, which would be using the gimbal low to the ground, flip it down, swing the camera around, and immediately I'm now able to use the gimbal upside down. The remote still works. I can look down and up. Now the controls are reversed, but if you need to quickly realign, you can just grab and rotate the motor itself to get it back in place. When you're done, swing it back up, bring the motor back around, and you're ready to go. So it's very quick, very convenient, and very easy to utilize, control, and work with in this setup. So let's take it off. There's a little latch here. You pull down, rotate, kind of wiggle it out. The gimbal will come off from the handle. And if we look in the base of the handle, you can attach a lanyard here. There's a better place on the front of the gimbal right there. That's more secure to hold it, but you can use it on the handle. I wouldn't recommend doing it. Mostly because if you rotate the handle, it will pop out and you have a storage place for 2 micro SD cards, which I think is great to do. But I know on longer shots, people recording at 4K or even 2K consistently, most of them have 128 gig to 64 gig SD cards, so you'll be able to get a fair amount of recording done, and if you have 2 extra ones in backup here, it'll be really good. The one thing to watch out for here is this plastic O-ring seems to be rather loose, and if you're not careful when you pull that out, it may come out and get lost. And that would be a bad thing because then you'd lose the water resistance of the handle there. You can see the blue blinking LED now means that the remote is in standby. Simply move a button and it wakes it right up, and you're right back to controlling the unit. So let's move in and talk about using the gimbal as a stabilizer or mounting it to other objects for what you want to film. So my helmet, this is my tripod mount, but you can get an idea of the standard mount that people have on the top of their helmet. Let's take that out of the frame. So the way they picture this thing mounted, I've got the gimbal turned off just to save some battery and make it easier to move around, is something like this. It would be hanging off the top of your helmet. Now you can use shorter mounts. You don't have to use these larger offset ones that would put it way up high off of your head. It has some weight to it, so this is, at this moment, it's not the most balanced thing to have off-center on your helmet, especially when you're looking down or something like that. So depending on how you mount it, it'll be mounted forward or back. Back would be a little more centered on your neckline, which would make it a little less stressful on the muscles, but it also means that in wide mode, most of your visor is going to be in the shot, and most recording like this would be done in wide mode because you want to capture maybe a little bit of the bike plus the trail, and if you're panning really quickly as you're riding, you're going to need it in wide mode, or the trail you're actually riding on is going to disappear from the frame for a lot of the shots. The other problem with this is when you try to clamp it down, the gimbal will rotate as you're hitting bumps and moving your head around. So while it will be stabilized, the weight of this unit, unless you really bolt it on there, it's going to slowly end up coming forward and hitting your helmet, and you won't be able to use it anymore. Now the main way I ride is by wearing the chest harness. This is the one I use. It's nothing fancy, it's just the Amazon Essentials thing. It's 15 bucks. There are much better ones out there. I just got this one based on some of the negative reviews of the official GoPro one. I've seen another rider, I'll link to his channel. He did a review of this same gimbal. He used a much more fancy mount that I'm kind of tempted to go try and find myself. It was much more robust, but the problem was the offset arms, and I'll show you why that's a problem. Now, by default, again, the harness would come with this type of a mount that has this offset here that can be mounted high or low. But what that does is it pushes the gimbal so far off the chest. So this would be my shoulders, this would be forward. And if you try to wear it the way they want you to, it's off so far with nothing to support it that the weight is going to angle down. Because when you ride, you'd be wearing the harness like this as you lean forward on the handlebars, meaning the gimbal is going to be either angled down or pulled back, and the weight's just going to pitch it forward. I've tried to ride it in several different configurations just like that, and every time, before I've gone more than 50 feet, it just flops straight forward and is unusable. So 2 things that I've done. I saw another video, I'll link to it down in the description below. they were using a short straight piece. Now I've got two 90 degrees here because that's all I have. They don't easily sell that short straight extension anymore. And I found a few online, but I didn't really want to spend 15-20 bucks on shipping one to myself for just this test. So I got it working with this straight piece, and this mount is much shorter. This is what I typically wear on my helmet to keep the gimbal mounted right there on top of my head. And what I found is by rotating it around and mounting it upside down, I can get the gimbal, let's see, screw that on a little bit there. I can get the gimbal to work in upside down low mode, and as I'm riding, you can see the bottom of it is pushed up against the chest plate, meaning that it's got nowhere down to go. The downside to this is it puts a lot of pressure and pulls on the shoulder straps as you ride. The benefit for me is my hydration pack has a chest clip that goes across the top and kind of helps hold the top in place. The downside is because I don't have the short extension, I have these two 90-degree extensions, the gimbal's mounted down, so my sternum is about right here. And that puts a lot of stress on the chest mount itself. So my first ride with this was successful, but the chest piece kept moving as the weight of me biking, pedaling, and moving up and down the hills, going off the rocks, kept yanking the camera off my chest. So there was this sound of constant thud, 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 thud. And then the motion of the camera was a little bit, you could see that the camera was moving, especially in relation to the bike handlebars. If the bike wasn't in the frame, then yeah, it probably wouldn't have been noticeable. So I tried a couple things to fix it, and the only one that really worked was getting a bungee cord, wrapping that around my chest to supplement this, and clipping it right here over the top. What that did was it pulled this centerpiece right here and held it to my chest. It didn't scratch any of this because it has rubber on it, but it was clipped right here like that, and it just held this whole frame to my chest, and it didn't move at all, and it worked really well. But it was very ghetto, and honestly, for a gimbal that costs $400 that they even show being utilized in some action shots, you really shouldn't have to go to that type of an extreme to get it to mount. The problem with it is I've got it tightened down, and I can easily just grab and freely rotate that gimbal, and that was pretty tightened down. The GoPro mounts are all this smooth plastic. If there was maybe some perforations on there where you could kind of get it to click into place where it wouldn't just freely slide, I don't think it would be the same type of a situation and the same problem. It works, the footage I got was great, but I really shouldn't have to buy a chest harness, then a supplementary bungee cord, and my hydration pack all to hold it to my chest. The reason that has to be done is there's, again, decent amount of weight to this unit, and when it's hanging off your chest, it's moving around. If I wear this too much, I am afraid that it's going to weaken these elastic straps. Again, this is Amazon Essentials, so I'm not breaking the bank on buying this, but really it shouldn't be quite that crazy. So that other harness that the other reviewer used, I'll link to his video. You can take a look at what he used. It was a much more sturdy mount. I would trust that a lot more, but even then, I wouldn't really want to go to all the trouble to wear another bungee cord or something else just to hold this to my chest. So the next issue that I've seen people have online with this unit is sometimes when they turn it on, it'll get balanced, they'll start to use it, and then depending on how they're holding it, the gimbal will kind of freak out, lose its orientation, and kind of shut itself down. Now this isn't my first gimbal per se. I've been using drones for a while, and my Phantom 2 has a gimbal on it, and I'm kind of familiar with some of its quirks and foibles. So what I've found, even when mounting it to my chest plate upside down, it doesn't usually like to be powered on in that configuration. Sometimes the unit kind of freaks out, it doesn't know where it is, and it won't orient properly. It'll flip around. I'm wearing it like this. It'll flip around and try to balance it this way, and it just runs up against the motors, and then it'll just shut down until you power cycle the unit again before it'll kick in and start working properly. So orienting the gimbal the right way when you turn it on seems to have alleviated that problem for me personally, but I can understand why the system needs to be turned on in a certain configuration. They built it to be turned on like this or mounted like this, and as long as I have it held vertically, I have not experienced a problem with getting it to align and then function more normally at that point. Now, this next issue is one that's kind of a showstopper for me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on, let it align. I'm going to use the remote here just so my hands aren't in the frame. I'm going to switch it over to lock mode. Now, one of the things that I bought this for was I wanted to be able to do kind of what you're seeing now. Set it on a table and just record. I do a fair amount of training, and I do a fair amount of subsequent training, refresh training, to try and bring agents up to speed, bring new knowledge to the desk, and sometimes you can't reach everyone, especially in an active call center. So one of the things I wanted to be able to do was to record a couple of my training sessions, kind of make cuts to the best segments of it, put it all together and post it to our SharePoint. That way, no matter where you are, what shift you work, you get the same training that everybody else gets. I would still do the same personal training, but I'd be able to at least have some good quality recording to back up what I'm saying, or allow people to, in their own time, go rewatch the video so that they can catch up on any notes they might have missed or something like that. So to be able to use it on the desk like this, or to even mount it to my mini tripod, as you can see here, and just plop it on the desk, point it the right direction, and then get to training, I would be able to easily put the remote in my pocket, and without having to think about it much, if I get up from my laptop and I start walking off to my right, it's very easy and natural to just grab the remote in my pocket, wake it up with one click, and then start panning it to the left to follow me over to the projector screen so I can point to something. I don't use laser pointers very much. I prefer to get up and kind of walk around the room, wakes the class up, because we all know how exciting PowerPoints are. But to be able to get up and angle it at me, keep myself centered in the frame, walk back to my laptop, have it follow me very easily, sit back down, and be all set to go would be fantastic. I can have my cell phone at my laptop, synced over Wi-Fi to the camera so that I'm able to see the framing when I'm back on my laptop. And when I'm up and walking around, it's pretty easy to aim a GoPro, even in medium or narrow mode. It's pointed at you. What more do you need to know? It doesn't have to be perfect. It would just need to capture the visual elements of the frame, and I could use my wireless microphone. I could use the microphone I'm using now to record myself talking without any problems. The downside is there's a glitch. For the entire time I've been talking, as you can see in both the table mounted or on the tripod, in lock mode, the gimbal automatically starts to pan in a certain direction. And there's no way to fix it or stop it. I can, of course, power on the remote, angle it right back over to center, but if I'm giving a lecture, the last thing I want to do is worry about the camera. I want to just point it and live with it and have good stabilized footage so people kicking the table won't affect it, me getting up and down from the table won't affect it, like a webcam, hitting the keys on the laptop, the webcam would bounce around, or even if I have a external webcam, which I do, table motion translates really poorly into those because they weren't designed to be mounted and stabilized in this type of a fashion. So it's doable, but I wanted to take the videos to that next level and make them look a little more quality. Now, I did email Removu support about this, and they did say that this is a known issue and there's nothing they can do to fix it, which is really unfortunate because of this very reason. I could live with wearing a bungee cord anytime I ride my bike or go skiing. I could live with that. But this type of an issue on a $400 with tax and shipping and all that stuff, gimbal is unacceptable to me. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ship it back because of this. And I'm sorry, this is just unacceptable. I didn't spend that kind of money on a gimbal that's not fully functional. And it doesn't matter which orientation it's in. If you have it on the table like this or mounted to the tripod, it will pan. Now, I'm no expert. I don't claim to have an electrical engineering degree or a design degree or anything like that that would tell me what's going on. My personal belief, understanding kind of how gimbals work by sending electrical impulses to the motors constantly based on data from accelerometers, gyroscopes, anything like that within the computer system here, it sends those signals to the motors to balance it out. So if I move the gimbal over here or rotate it, the gimbal will stay where it's at. I believe because of those constant electrical impulses going, the motor, when it's in its most relaxed state, those pulses cause a slight pan to the dominant side. That's just me guessing. Makes sense in my head, but that's just a guess for me. I've done several tests, and it seems like when I have it upside down or mounted in a way where the motor is working kind of against gravity, it won't pan, but I can see it twitching every time it would try to pan. So the gimbal's now moved almost 90 degrees. I've got the remote out. I just woke it up. There we go. Let's do a quick pan to the right. You can see it snaps right back to where I need it to be, ready to go. But it will again immediately start panning to the left, and that's just unacceptable. Now, Removu's answer to my email and my inquiry about that was to just not really use lock mode for that. They want me to use pan and the other mode. I have a whole slew of shots beyond just training videos that I need lock mode for. And I've done some tests with it before I knew that this problem existed, and I loved what I got. But I can no longer do those shoots because this is going to break everything. Usually you get everything lined up, you get the actors in place, you get the scene ready to shoot, you scream action. I don't want to have to worry about coming back and reframing my shot all over again with the camera, especially when you're doing rolling shots or moving action, things like that. No, it just doesn't work. So I sent a follow-up email to Removu asking if there would be any warranty exchanges, or if they knew when a new revision was coming out, and if they were planning to have this fixed in a new revision, because I really like the gimbal. But unfortunately, I never heard back, and it's been about 2 weeks. So the gimbal overall is fantastic. It's very high quality in the stabilized footage that it produces. The motors feel great. There's a lot of metal in use here. It feels premium, it looks premium, it functions in a previous manner when you don't have those specific issues that you're trying to deal with. It's a pleasure to use. It's very simple to use. You can just boot it up and immediately get to work in creating great videos and good content with it. But to spend $400 on a product that one of the modes you're told from the developers to essentially not use is unacceptable to me. They were so close to releasing the perfect gimbal for kind of the jack of all trades, and they came so close, but they missed. But I'm really sad to see this go, and I was on the fence for 2 weeks about shipping this back. I tried to live with it, I tried to work around it, I ran so many tests, but it just won't work. The panning issue is just something I can't work around. So in a revision 2, what I would like to see is a few things adjusted. One, this mounting point has to be adjusted, and it looks like they've created a way, because you can see the screw marks on, or the screws there. It looks like this is meant to come out and be replaced with other attachments or new ways of mounting at some point in the future, but I haven't really seen much about that. Because of that, I would like to see them remove the screen from the top here and put it over here on the side. Maybe make it longer, add more information about the modes, any warnings, things like that. I think they would be able to add anything more here on the side, because honestly, I don't need to see that on the top here. The best way to mount it is vertically like this. You saw when I was running the pan tests, it was faster in this configuration. And it would be so much better if I could mount it to my chest like this, have a tiny offset on the plate. It would be less weight causing a rotational issue due to weight. Like when you mount it here, it wants to lean forward. If it's mounted like this vertically, you can see with the same amount of pressure, I can hold it steady, but as soon as I do this, it rotates down and pulls. So if I hold it, there it goes. Same amount of pressure, but due to the offset weight, it's harder to hold. So if they added a mounting point up here, it would be so much better to ride with, and it wouldn't stick a mile off your chest, which is kind of dangerous, as I'm afraid if I'm riding, the handlebars may nick that motor, and I think it's happened once or twice. No damage, no scratch, but I think it's hit it and kind of skewed the motor for a moment until it could realign and adjust. But having a mounting here and a mounting here would totally change the usability of this tool and make it a whole different ball game. The other part of that is I think they might be able to downsize the weight here, make the screen a little smaller, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier with the battery. They've made a system with interchangeable batteries. Batteries are not super duper expensive. I mean, a larger battery for my cell phone was 10 bucks. I'm pretty sure they could produce these batteries at 10 to 20 bucks a pop, and I would much rather buy 4 to 5 batteries that last 2.5, 3 hours maximum, I think. I mean, again, that's about the length of a GoPro battery life, so being able to swap both out at the same time would be functional, and it wouldn't impact the production much because, well, the camera battery has to be replaced, so you might as well swap out the battery on the gimbal at the same time. Doing that, I think, would help cut down on some of the weight, and they might be able to squeeze some other adjustments into that casing as well. But on the whole, it's a fantastic product. My concerns might not be any concerns that you may have, and if that's the case, fantastic. You would be very pleased with this gimbal. If my type of concerns are things that you would also have a problem with, then I definitely suggest, unfortunately, passing by the Removu S1, at least for the first revision. If they come out with a new revision that fixes it, I will be right there ready to buy, because as of now, there's nothing on the market that, for me, does everything that this one can do in the same quality, in the same package. They did a lot of things right with this, forward thinking with water resistant, the remote being able to pop right off and function without it, the stability of the unit, it's just almost perfect. Hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully it helped you out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment. I'll answer whatever I can. And as always, thank you for watching.